The dream of a forbidden city. Certainly has Allah showed to his messenger the vision in truth. You will surely enter al-Masjid al-Haram if Allah wills in safety, with your head shaved and hair shortened, not fearing anyone. Surah Al-Fath 48:27. Have you ever had a longing so deep it felt like a physical ache in your soul? What becomes of a people who have been exiled from their sacred homeland, their hearts yearning to return to the center of their spiritual universe? And could it be that the path to a promised victory is not paved with the clash of swords, but with the quiet, agonizing surrender to a wisdom that the world cannot yet see? Our story begins in the 6th year after the Hijrah, in the bustling, radiant city of Medina. The community of Muslims, once a small, persecuted band, was now a recognized power in the Arabian Peninsula. They had weathered the storms of Badr and Uhud, and had miraculously survived the great siege of the Trench. Their state was one of fragile stability, a beacon of faith in a world of tribal warfare and idolatry. Their blessing was their leader, the messenger of Allah, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, whose presence was a daily source of guidance and divine light. But for the Muhajirun, those who had been driven out of Mecca, there was a constant, unspoken sorrow. Mecca was not just a city they had left behind. It was the direction of their prayers, the site of the ancient Kaaba built by Ibrahim, and the home of their deepest spiritual memories. The yearning to return, to perform the rites of pilgrimage, was a fire in their hearts. It was in this atmosphere of longing that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had a dream. He saw himself and his companions entering the sacred city of Mecca, their heads shaven as pilgrims, performing the rites of the lesser pilgrimage, Umrah, in peace and security. In the world of a prophet, a dream is not a mere fantasy. It is a form of divine revelation, a promise from God himself. When he told his companions of this vision, a wave of pure, ecstatic joy swept through the city. The promise was real. Excitedly, they were going home. The call went out. The prophet announced his intention to make the pilgrimage. He emphasized that their journey was to be entirely peaceful. They would not go as warriors, but as humble pilgrims. 1,400 men answered the call. They donned the simple, seamless white garments of the pilgrim, ihram, casting aside all symbols of status and wealth. They took with them their sacrificial animals, but their swords remained sheathed in their scabbards, a clear sign to all that their intentions were purely for worship. As the great caravan of unarmed pilgrims set out from Medina, the desert air was thick with a mixture of reverent hope and unspoken tension. They were walking towards Mecca, a city still ruled by their fiercest enemies, the Quraysh, a people whose hearts were still filled with arrogance and a deep-seated hatred for the new faith. They were walking into the lion's den, armed with nothing but their faith in God and the truth of their prophet's dream. The standoff at the edge of a sanctuary. The journey through the desert was a river of faith, the air filled with the rhythmic chant of the pilgrims, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik. Here I am, O God, at your service. As they drew near to the sacred territory of Mecca, they camped at a place on the edge of the sanctuary, a barren valley with a well known as Hudaybiyyah. It was here that their hopeful procession came to an abrupt, jarring halt. The news of their approach had reached Mecca, and the reaction of the Quraysh was one of paranoid fury. They did not see a group of humble pilgrims. They saw an invading army. Their pride could not fathom the idea of Muhammad and his followers entering their city, even peacefully, as it would be seen as a sign of their own weakness. The divine sign of the Muslims' peaceful intent was met with the arrogant rebellion of the Quraysh. They swore by their idols that Muhammad would not enter Mecca, not this year, not ever. They dispatched their most formidable cavalry, led by the brilliant general Khalid ibn al-Walid, who had not yet embraced Islam, to block the path.
The tension at Hudaybiyyah was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The Muslims were in their sacred pilgrim garb, forbidden from fighting. The Quraysh were in full battle armor, their swords drawn, blocking the way to God's own house. This very act of obstruction was condemned by Allah in the Quran. It is they who disbelieved and obstructed you from al-Masjid al-Haram while the sacrificial animals were prevented from reaching their place of sacrifice. Surah Al-Fath 48:25. The Prophet, committed to a peaceful resolution, sent envoys to negotiate. The Quraysh were unyielding. Finally, he sent one of his most respected companions, Uthman ibn Affan, a man whose noble clan, the Banu Umayyah, held great power in Mecca. He was sent to assure the Quraysh of their peaceful intentions. But Uthman was delayed in the city. Hours turned into a day, and a dark, terrifying rumor began to spread like wildfire through the Muslim camp. Uthman had been betrayed and murdered. The news was an electric shock. The murder of an envoy was a universal declaration of war. The mood of the camp transformed instantly from one of patient waiting to one of righteous fury. The companions, their hearts burning with a love for their brother and their prophet, flocked to the messenger of Allah. He was sitting beneath a large acacia tree. There, one by one, they came forward and placed their hand upon his, making a solemn pledge, a pledge to fight to the death, to avenge their fallen brother, and to never flee from battle. This was the legendary Bayat al-Ridwan, the pledge of the tree. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, narrating the significance of this moment years later, spoke of the immense divine pleasure it invoked. He said of those who took the pledge solemnly, "None of those who swore allegiance under the tree will enter the hellfire." Jami at-Tirmidhi 3860.
This sudden unified resolve of the 1,400 believers terrified the Quraysh. They had not expected this. They quickly released Uthman and sent their own chief negotiator, a cunning and hard-nosed diplomat named Suhail ibn Amr, to sue for peace. The final unmistakable sign of the Quraysh's arrogance was about to be revealed, not in the form of a sword, but in the ink of a treaty. The treaty that broke 1,000 hearts. The arrival of the Quraysh negotiator, Suhail ibn Amr, marked the beginning of the most agonizing test of faith the companions had ever faced. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, saw Suhail approaching, and with prophetic insight, knew that a settlement was near. But the terms that Suhail presented were so one-sided, so outwardly humiliating, that they felt like a slap in the face to the believers who had just pledged their lives to fight. The negotiations were tense and fraught with pride. When the Prophet began to dictate the treaty, starting with the customary Islamic opening, calmly, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, Suhail immediately objected. "I do not know this most gracious," he said arrogantly, demanding, "Write only, in your name, O God." The Prophet, to the shock of his companions, agreed. When the Prophet dictated, "Clear tone, this is what Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, has agreed to," Suhail objected again. "If we believed you were the messenger of Allah," he snapped, "we would not have fought you. Write only your name and your father's name, Muhammad ibn Abdullah." The companions gasped. This was a denial of the very foundation of their faith. But again the Prophet, acting on divine wisdom that no one else could see, calmly agreed. Then came the treaty's main clauses, each one a dagger in the hearts of the Muslims. The Muslims must immediately return to Medina without performing the Umrah. They could return the following year, but for only 3 days, and carrying only sheathed swords. A truce of 10 years would be established between them. And the final, most painful condition: if any man from the Quraysh fled to Medina and became a Muslim, he must be returned to Mecca. But if any Muslim apostatized and fled from Medina to Mecca, he would not be returned.
The companions were in this state of shock. This felt like an absolute crushing defeat. Umar ibn al-Khattab, his fiery heart unable to bear what he saw as a humiliation of his faith, stormed up to the Prophet. The hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari, 2731, preserves this raw, emotional exchange. "O Messenger of Allah," Umar demanded, his voice shaking with anger, "are we not on the truth and our enemy on falsehood?" "Yes," the Prophet replied calmly. "Then why should we accept this degradation in our religion?" Umar pressed. The Prophet's answer was simple and absolute. "I am the messenger of Allah, and I will not disobey him, and he is my helper." But Umar's heart was still burning. He went to Abu Bakr, who gave him the exact same answer, telling him to hold fast to the Prophet's command. The treaty was signed. The Prophet had agreed to every single humiliating demand. The emotional and spiritual destruction of that moment was palpable. The companions felt lost. Their elation at the dream had turned into the bitter ashes of defeat. The final turning point came when the Prophet, his duty done, gave his next command. He stood before his men and said, "Get up, slaughter your sacrificial animals, and shave your heads," thus officially ending their state of pilgrimage. But no one moved. The companions were paralyzed, frozen by their grief, their disappointment, and their confusion. The Prophet of God repeated the command. Still, not a single man stood up. For the first time in his mission, the beloved companions of the Prophet were in a state of collective disobedience, their hearts too broken to obey. A terrible crisis was unfolding, a deadlock between the infallible Prophet and his grief-stricken followers. The Prophet, his face etched with sorrow, retreated into his tent. What could possibly break this impasse and save the community from itself?
The wisdom that saved a nation. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, entered his tent, his heart heavy with the weight of his companions' despair. The situation was unprecedented. The men who would have died for him without a second thought were, now in their grief, unable to obey a direct command. It was a crisis that threatened the very fabric of his authority. In that moment of intense distress, he turned to the person who was with him in the tent, his wise and experienced wife, Salamah. He told her what had happened. The people are ruined," he said. "I gave them a command, and they did not obey." Salamah, a woman of profound intellect and deep understanding of human nature, listened patiently. She did not offer a theological argument or a political treatise. She did not suggest that he go out and rebuke his companions. She offered a piece of advice so simple, so psychologically brilliant, that it would be remembered for all time as the moment a woman's wisdom saved a nation from itself. This pivotal moment is narrated in the same authentic hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari 27:31. She said, "O Prophet of Allah, do you want them to do that? Go out and do not speak a single word to any of them until you have slaughtered your own sacrificial animal and called your barber to shave your head." Her advice was genius. It bypassed the need for more words, which were now useless against the wall of emotion. It was a call for pure, decisive action. It would communicate, non-verbally, that the decision was final and that the Prophet himself had submitted to the will of Allah. He took her advice. Without saying another word, he walked out of his tent and into the midst of his paralyzed companions. He went to his sacrificial camel and, in front of everyone, performed the ritual slaughter. Then he called for his barber, who came and shaved his head, completing the rites of the pilgrimage. The effect was instantaneous and electric. When the companions saw the Prophet acting, it was as if they were jolted from a trance. The finality of his actions shattered their emotional paralysis. They realized the divine decree had been sealed. A wave of shame and renewed devotion washed over them. They scrambled to their feet, rushing to slaughter their own animals. They began to shave each other's heads with such frantic energy and grief that the narrator of the hadith says they were almost cutting one another in their haste. The crisis was over. The authority of the Prophet was restored. The unity of the community was saved. And it was all because of the simple, clear-headed wisdom of one righteous woman. This story is a powerful testament to the honored place of women in Islam and the importance of a wise and supportive spouse. The Prophet, the greatest of all creation, did not hesitate to take counsel from his wife in one of the most critical moments of his entire mission. Thoughtful. This serves as a timeless lesson, highlighting a principle often forgotten, that wisdom is not gendered. The Quran itself praises the partnership between believing men and women. Solemn. The believing men and believing women are allies of one another. They enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong, and establish prayer, and give zakah, and obey Allah and His Messenger. Those Allah will have mercy upon them. Indeed, Allah is exalted in might and wise. Surah At-Tawbah 9:71. Reflective. Salamah was a true ally to her husband and her community. Her advice was not just helpful, it was prophetic in its insight. And so ended the standoff at Hudaybiyyah, not with an argument or a show of force, but with a silent action, guided by the wisdom of a woman. The treaty that had felt like a humiliation was now sealed, and the believers would soon learn that it was, in fact, the greatest victory they had ever achieved. Triumphant.